postal worker is shot dead on a highway.
There was multiple gunshots to the front of Tony Mosby's postal truck.
Oh, man.
We had nothing, no suspect information, anything.
And no indication that that victim was doing anything but his job when someone fired shots into his vehicle.
Detectives zero in on potential suspects.
I need you to be honest with me. I know that she's leaving a lot out. This is your life on the line.
A mother's tough love breaks down a barrier.
I done raised you to be no liar. Tell them the truth.
I'm sorry, Mama.
Are you a covert killer?
No, I'm not a killer.
Investigators searching for answers in the interrogation room.
I'm so sorry.
Dallas 911, this is Lewis. What's located?
Yes, I need paramedics and police. I'm at 30 eastbound. I need somebody here real quick.
What's going on there?
Someone has shot a driver. This is the postal service. There's a postal vehicle here. I don't know if he's still breathing, but there's a gunshot through the front windshield. Oh, man.
The driver of a USPS box truck crashed into the guardrail. When officers arrived, they say that driver was already dead.
We learned that one of our motor vehicle service drivers was shot and killed while he was in the course of his duties on I-30. We were able to identify the victim as Mr. Tony Mosby. He had been with the post office about 14 years, 58 years of age at the time.
There was multiple gunshots to the front of Tony Mosby's postal truck. One of the rounds had gone through the windshield and struck him in the face. And that was the round that took his life. When a postal employee is murdered, we, as a federal agency, have federal jurisdiction. We take that very seriously and we pull out all the stops.
Uncle Tony was just a very hard worker. He was the glue, the backbone of the Mosby side of the family.
He was a big teddy bear, a hardworking, very caring and lovable person. He was always working. That's one thing he loved doing, was working.
I definitely looked up to, his work ethic, his drive, and, that ambition. He was really a great man.
What the police was able to tell us was that, Uncle Tony was just shot and killed, and that they don't know who did it. I was just in shock.
I was definitely thinking about who could have done this to Tony, because he never really bothered anybody.
Right now, police have no witnesses, no surveillance video, no suspect in the death of this USPS truck driver, and no indication that that victim was doing anything but his job when someone fired shots into his vehicle.
When I arrived at the scene, we had nothing, no suspect information, anything.
One of the things that's very important is to establish a timeline, and we got to start putting the puzzle together to help lead us to the person that's responsible for this.
We started canvassing the area and doing everything that we possibly could to try to find out if there were any surveillance video, anything around that could help us capture this incident on camera.
There was a gas station that actually had video showing Mr. Mosby's vehicle, the truck that he was driving, right before it entered the interstate. That gave us a good idea of when he was getting on the interstate. Another critical piece was there was neighborhoods adjoining the interstate that had electric doorbell that with video and audio, what appeared to be 4 shots.
but we still didn't know who committed this horrible crime. It was a lot of pressure.
The United States Postal Service is now offering $50,000 as a reward for any information about a shooting that killed one of its employees.
When $50,000 was placed forward, it made the world of difference in this case.
Her relative worked for the Postal Service, and I think once they had learned Mr. Mosby had died, it was weighing on her.
Today's date is February 21st, 2018. Time is 11:48. Jessica, my name is Derek Cheney. I'm with the Dallas Police Department.
And I'm Paul Ecker with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service.
If interviewing and interrogating anyone, you have to make them comfortable. She was very nervous, very scared, because she knew this murder has been on the news. She knows information about it.
We really appreciate you stepping up and doing the right thing and being here, okay?
Okay.
You're not under custody.
Right.
You're not in custody, and you're free to leave at any point. So all this is voluntary information that you're providing, yes? No one's threatening you or anything to that effect? Okay.
We had dinner there. After we were done, his cousin, Donnie, actually called us to see if we wanted to go bowling or anything. We had them meet us outside the restaurant.
Okay, and you said they. Who was all?
Donnie is his cousin, and Chanel is the girlfriend.
Do you know him by Donnie? Do you know by his last name?
His Farrell.
Donnie Farrell.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Tell me what happened.
We decided that we were going to go to a bar and shoot some pool.
A lot of times people, they're a little bit hesitant to come forward when it comes down to these investigations. They always have a saying, snitches get stitches. So we want to make sure that they can talk to us and come forward about everything.
What happened?
We then left and went to CJ's Billiards. We were there roughly until about 1:30. After that, we tried to go back to the hotel. Chanel was driving.
Okay.
Donnie was in the passenger seat.
Okay.
There was a U.S. postal truck in front of us. She was driving very close to this truck. She then swerved over to go around him. We passed up this U.S. postal truck. According to Donnie, the driver of that truck flipped us off. When I looked to the right, and the gun that Donnie had was sticking out to my side of the window.
Okay. How did he position his body?
He kind of leaned out a little bit to where his head and his right arm was sticking out of the window. I had heard it go off.
How many shots did you hear?
Roughly about 3.
And all 3 shots came from the gun that you saw Donnie's holding?
Correct.
Do you have your phone now?
Yes, I do.
Could you show me a picture of him?
I sure can.
At that point, we have now identified the shooter, Don Farrell.
Okay, describe the gun for me.
Looked like a revolver, but kind of like a newer revolver, not one of those.
You know what color?
Silver.
And she said that gun was a revolver. And so now we have an idea if this projectile comes back to a gun that is a revolver. Now we could say that this is a possible bullet from the gun that was used to kill the victim.
Putting all that together, we had enough to get a warrant.
Wednesday evening, we had postal inspectors at the residence of Miss Walker. And as they were out on surveillance, they saw Mr. Farrell exit the residence with a weapon in his hand. Mr. Farrell saw the agents and ran back in the house, and we then had a barricade situation. Dallas County Sheriff's Office sent their tactical team out to this residence in Hutchins, Texas, and began to establish lines of communication. Miss Walker and the rest of the family members were able to exit the residence. Mr. Farrell stayed behind.
When I went up into the interview room with her, my main objective was to build a rapport with her.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. You, gonna be alone.
Well, I hope so.
Her boyfriend was now barricaded inside that residence. I know there was some worry for her, but we want to make sure that she understands when you're not truthful, it can draw some questions about your involvement as well. Just be straightforward with me, okay?
The victim, Tony Mosby, was a U.S. postal worker, and as such, she was a federal employee. That means if law enforcement can catch his killer, that person will likely face a murder charge in federal court.
So Chanel, I'm working this case, and your name came up in my investigation. My initial approach to her was to let her know that I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm gonna tell you the truth, but now I need you to also be honest with me and tell me what happened. Like I told you before when I told you out there, I'm looking at you as a witness, okay? But at the same time, I need you to be perfectly honest with me about everything. I'm talking about start to finish. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not gonna feed you no fried ice cream. I'm gonna be 100% with you, okay? So, will you be honest with me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's go back a few days, okay? So, what happened on the 18th?
Which is Sunday, right?
Right.
Sunday. Me and Donnie, we was at home.
Now, what is Donnie's name?
Donnie Farrell Jr.
Okay. And who is he to you?
My fiance. He had texted his cousin and asked what they were doing. They said they probably want to go shoot pool or whatever. So we found a pool hall that closed like at 2, and we was like, okay, we're just gonna go there and shoot pool.
What time y'all leave the pool hall?
I think it was about close to 2 or at 2. At this point, he's driving because I was too intoxicated to drive, and I didn't want to wreck or do nothing. So I think we went home.
Okay. And that was it. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing the information that I have, that I learned up until this point, I know that she's leaving a lot out. I'm talking to you as a witness, all right?
Yes, sir.
But at the same time, you can. I know that you drove the whole night, okay? Mm-hmm. All right. I know that, okay?
Yes, sir.
I know that there's more to that highway incident, and I know you love your fiance, okay? But I need you to be honest with me, okay?
Yes, sir. When we left the pool hall, we was on the freeway. And I was drunk and I was driving. And he was on the passenger side. And he was like, babe, can I let off? And I was like, no. What? I was like, no, Donnie, what the did I tell you about doing stupid stuff like that? But he did it anyway.
When you said let it off, what did he shoot his gun or what?
Yeah, he shot his gun.
And what did he do? Show me what he did. Where is he sitting at?
He's sitting in the passenger side.
Right, I'm him. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm him. Okay. So he's right here. So when I have her to go through the details, I just wanted her to actually give me that visual. You know, I'm talking to her, thinking back to that morning when I was out there on that scene, so that way I'll know how the shooting actually took place. You go ahead and be right here, and I'm gonna sit right here. Okay. So you driving? You on the highway? Yeah. Okay. Who's on the highway with you guys? What's in front of you? What's around you?
I don't know what.
Any other vehicles on the road with you?
No, I really didn't see any. I don't really know if it was any cars on the freeway when we was on the freeway.
Chanel.
I really wasn't paying attention.
Okay, let's remember. Let's be honest with each other. Okay.
I am.
You driving? I'm you. I'm driving. Okay, and you're him. How did he do it?
I guess he just put it out the window.
He did. He used his right hand. And he just.
And I guess he just like shot it off.
All right. Was there anybody around?
I don't.
And Chanel? I know that she knows more. I'm still trying to get her to come forth with more information, more details, so that way I can match what I have at the scene.
I really was intoxicated, and I really don't know what all was said and how it was said. I can only tell you what I remember from that night and Saturday. My mom had asked me what happened.
When did she ask you what happened?
When we were outside. And we were waiting, and we've been trying to call him to get him to come outside.
All right, so that's when your mom's asking you to what happened, stuff like that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Give me 1 second, okay?
Yes, sir.
And I explained it to her mother how serious this was. So I allowed her mother to go into the interview room. It was a risky move. I didn't want her to shut down on me.
I'm gonna tell you like this. I know you love this dude. This man that lost his life. Listen to me. Tell them the truth. It's nothing you can do now. Donnie did what he did. That was messed up. You gotta look at that family. If that was your son, you would want somebody to tell you. Did you hear what I'm saying?
Yes, Mom.
I didn't raise you to be no liar for nobody, for no and for no female. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yes, Mom.
You tell these officers everything. You have a freaking son you gotta think about. Do you hear what I'm saying? You tell him every single thing, Beijing. Don't you hide nothing back. Because that man got kids and he can't see his kids no more. If that was you or your daddy or your brothers or something, you would want somebody to tell the truth. His family need closure. Do you hear what I'm saying? Tell them the truth.
I'm sorry, Mom.
I'm good.
I'm sorry.
I'm Beijing. I'm good.
I'm sorry.
You tell them what happened.
Sorry, Mom.
One thing I commend this mother here, even though she know how bad it is. She reminds me of the parenting that I grew up on, that old school parenting where, hey, no matter how bad it seems, always tell the truth.
Tell them the truth. And you tell them everything, word for word, what happened, how it was set up, what was done. Tell them the truth, Beijing. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yes.
Don't lie. Do you hear me?
Yes, Mom.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Once the mother came out, I just felt good that it was time to go back in there. Let's talk, okay? All right. I need to know, Chanel. Okay. What happened?
Okay. I was driving, and I think the only truck or the only vehicle I seen on the highway was the mail truck. And I wasn't paying attention to if he was cutting me off or not, or kept jumping in front of me. So Donnie was like, he keep cutting us off or whatever. And he said that he gave us the finger. But I didn't know, I didn't see it. And like I said, I didn't see him with the gun in his hand, but I heard it go off. And that's when I guess the truck had swerved over and hit the rail or something like that.
Okay.
And that's what, that's what I seen or I experienced.
The main reason why he wanted to fire off because...
Maybe because the guy caught up in front of us, but I don't know, because he was like, babe, can I let off one time? And, that's when I had seen the truck swerve over and was behind me, and I guess it had hit the wall or something like that. And I'm not gonna lie to you, like, I wasn't even in that state of mind of, thinking that he would do something like that.
Okay.
I didn't know, because like I said, I think I had more drinks than him, and I'm so sorry. Like, this is not him. This is not him. I never would have imagined him doing anything like that, because that's not the type of person he is.
Became very emotional. I mean, this is his girlfriend. They're expecting a child together. It must have been hard to give up this information. How long y'all been together?
We've been together since November. He proposed to me on Christmas Eve.
He know about the possible baby on the way?
Yes.
I feel that Mom's conversation with her really helped her understand the seriousness of this investigation. So that's why she gave me the information she's given me and pretty much corroborated with everything that I already had received.
But I feel sorry for what happened to this man, because I wouldn't want nothing to happen like this to my son. And I'm trying to do right and let you guys know.
But you had no idea?
No, sir, I didn't. Because when he asked me, can he fire off, it just asked me, to me, that was asking me, can he just shoot his gun off, like to try to show, I guess, because his cousin and the cousin girlfriend was in a car with us. So that's how I took it as. But I still told him no, because I don't like him doing that. And now this happened.
Okay. All right. Give me 1 second, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Do I believe she left out some important details? Yes, because she did not want to put her boyfriend in jail. But he knew where to push her to make her tell the truth.
Investigators made an arrest last night. Donnie Farrell, the 25-year-old, was reportedly the passenger in a car that was driving erratically on I-30 near downtown Dallas early Monday morning.
We already had an idea of what our challenges was. We know that he will deny he had any involvement, but also he didn't know what we knew already.
It's all about that approach, so that way they'll know me, not just a guy with a gun and badge. Walking into that room knowing that everything is at stake, it's game time.
law enforcement was able to track down the suspect.
In the murder of Tony Mosby.
Police arrested 25-year-old Donnie Farrell after a lengthy standoff.
I was just so relieved, you know, he was finally off the street, and then it was just so angry. He didn't hurt your family. He wasn't, you know, breaking into your home. Why would you need to do something like this?
I need to talk to you, okay? All right. You all right with that? So, what's your name, man?
Donnie Farrell.
Donnie, okay. Where you from?
From?
Yeah.
Where I was born?
Yeah.
Los Angeles, California. I was born in West Covina, California.
You from LA?
Yeah, I grew up in LA.
Okay, cool. So the biggest thing when I walked into that room, I wanted to make him feel comfortable. So my goal was to build a relationship with him, build a rapport with him. You know, what do you call it? You call it Chanel?
Chanel.
Okay, yeah. So you love him?
I love her to death.
That's what I'm talking about. Love her to death. All right. How long did it take y'all to be boyfriend and girlfriend?
I'm gonna say about a week and a half. It was kind of like love at first sight, you know.
Oh, so you when you saw it, you said, I ain't down.
I just knew the presence was strong. I felt it, you know.
Yeah. You see yourself building a lot with her, right? To my understanding too, it's a possibility that you guys may be expecting her, right? You got a baby on the way, possibility, right?
Mm-hmm. And I got a 4-year-old stepson.
You got a 4-year-old stepson. I felt like he was reserved, that I wanted to get across to him to let him know, even though you're arrested right now, I'm human, let's talk and we'll move forward. In this case, I know you were there, okay? I know you were there, and I know really what happened, but I want to help me understand, okay, what happened. Yeah, like I told you before, everybody make mistakes. You made plenty of mistakes. I made plenty of mistakes. All right, but at the end of the day, as men, okay, we own up to what we've done, right, and we move on. All right. So on the way from the pool hall, where did y'all go?
It's foggy. I don't remember stopping on the road. After we left the bar, I don't remember stopping.
Okay. Huh?
I can't remember stopping nowhere else.
Okay,
And I'm like really half asleep, you know. I'm like so faded.
He kept using the term he was faded, meaning that he was under the influence. He was trying to make me believe that he was so drunk where he just don't remember anything. I knew that wasn't truthful. So when y'all on the highway, y'all headed back to the hotel. All right. What happened?
We heading back to the hotel.
Mm-hmm. Did you get into it with anybody? You didn't. Okay. I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna be straightforward with you, man. And like I have been the whole time. I know there was more to this case. I ain't lied to you from the day one. When I came in, I hadn't been mean to you any time. I've been straight, respectful to you, right?
And you seem like a straightforward
yeah.
man.
I wanted him to continue to talk to me, so I wanted to continue to drill those things into him. Hey, don't lie to me. Tell me the truth. This is your life on the line. I've been working this case and got a lot of information. You see what I'm saying? And that's why I need you to be real honest with me, because I'd rather for me to your own story than me to have to tell your story. I know you're not a cold-blooded killer. All right? I know you're not. I know you're not a cold-blooded killer. Are you a cold-blooded killer?
No, I'm not a killer.
I know that there was an incident where an individual may have been cutting you guys off. And I don't know if he made a gesture towards you, flipped you off or whatever, but at that point in time, you had a gun on you. Did you mean to kill him?
Who said I killed him?
So at this point, I believe that he wasn't taking me serious where I kept saying, I know, but he was at a point in time, okay, if you know, prove it. Did you mean to shoot at him?
Who said I shot at him?
I'm not gonna play no games with you, you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. I know you
know.
I do. Had his arms folded, had a frown on his face. He's sizing me up, I'm sizing him up. I didn't think that he believed that, because I kept telling him, I know that you shot. So I started digging a little deeper to give him some more information, to let him know, I know what happened. I've spoken with Chanel, right? I've spoken with Jessica. I've spoken with these folks. You see what I'm saying? And you the last one left. I know you fired at that guy. I know you fired at the vehicle that he was in, all right? You think we just showed up at your house and picked you out of all these millions of folk? You think we did that? Just out of random. We say, hey, we're gonna mess with old Donnie Jr. today. You think we did that? No, Doc. That ain't the way it works. You see what I'm saying? You're a young man. You got your whole life ahead of you. All right? But I need to know what happened. Did he make you that angry? Or was it just an accident?
I was faded.
You was faded.
I was real life out of it.
The gun, how long you owned the gun?
I ain't owned it that long. It was not even mine. It was given to me.
It was given to you? Who gave it to you?
Some guy.
Really? How, what kind of gun is it?
38.
At any moment, he could ask for his attorney. So I wanted to make sure to keep him talking to me.
The only reason I had it, to be honest with you, being honest, because I was working at 7-Eleven. That's why it was given to me.
Okay.
Because I was working up there.
And for the past robbery, I mean, that's understandable. I mean, you got to protect yourself all the time. But we talking about this guy here. This man didn't deserve to die. You know what I mean? This man that you shot and killed. This man was at work. You hear me? Did you mean to do it?
No, I didn't.
Were you just trying to scare him, or what was it?
That was like my main intention.
Was it just because you thought he was trying to cut you off, or what was it?
No, I mean, at the same time, look, I ain't trying to make no excuses. You know, I did what I did.
Yeah.
Gotta face the consequences. But I was intoxicated. Like I said, I was so faded, man, like my eyes were barely open.
Okay. All right, give me 1 second, all right?
There were times that Detective Walton would exit, come out to us, and we would just discuss things on the checklist, things that we wanted to make sure were answered. What we wanted to do was to get Mr. Farrell to the point of fully describing how he shot at Mr. Mosby.
When you shot at him, did he see you? Because I know y'all were close. I mean, y'all had to be close to him. Y'all were close.
He wasn't that close. He was behind us.
Okay, so
I know that.
So okay. So Chanel driving. You said put your chair up so I'm just trying to get a visual.
Like we know my fiance.
Yeah. Okay. So we drive. Put your chair up some more. Put your chair up some more. So okay, Kurt, we right here. All right. So Chanel driving. All right. So what was asking? When y'all getting on the ramp, what happened?
I don't know. I was faded.
Okay.
I don't know nothing about how we got on.
Okay, but you know how you shot. How did you shot? Which hand did you use to shoot?
My right.
So how did you? What hand?
Like that.
Huh?
Like this.
You did just like this, and you pulled the trigger. And you say you emptied it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
When Detective Walton had him demonstrate how he shot, that can show his intent because you have to aim exactly in the direction of that truck to hit that driver.
I know you had to look back.
I did not. I was so faded, I just...
It couldn't have been a way. Now that I'm thinking about it.
The truth, I just want like that.
Because when the information I got, you saw what you were doing. You shooting like this. Be straightforward.
I'm being straightforward. I'm like that.
To shoot like this, all right, and to be that accurate. Done.
I'm telling you the truth.
I started telling him it's not believable. And it was a risky move because at any moment he could ask for his attorney. Just saying, I'm asking these things for a reason. You know, if you try to protect your girl, just say it. Just be straightforward and tell me. You know what I'm saying? If you feel like he disrespected your girl, I mean, you already told me you love that girl. Based on his demeanor and based on the way he was acting inside the room, I knew that he was getting ready to be honest. You come this far, don't hold back now. You did just like this. Just like this. Just like this. This man made you mad by the way he was driving. You know what I'm saying? This man made you mad by the way he was driving. You have to look like this.
No, like this. If I looked, I was looking in the rearview mirror because he was behind us. I was looking to the side.
So you didn't turn your head just like this. Be straightforward with that.
Be straight.
I want to get a true and complete understanding, knowing that I have witnesses saying this, I have evidence that's saying this, but you're saying something else. That's a problem. I'm asking these things for a reason because, like I say, I've talked to a lot of people. All right, the way you said that you did this, all right, that's not going to be believable. You know these rooms are recorded. You know what I mean? You got people that's watching this video.
I did like this. Did like this.
You did what? Like what?
I did like that.
You looked and you saw it. You saw which way you was shooting.
Yeah, I did.
You did.
Yeah.
You wasn't looking straight.
No, I did like this.
You did like that. Now we're at the point where I felt like he's giving me everything. And the main reason why you shot the gun and you look back like that is because of why?
I was intoxicated and he tried to cut us off. Well, he did cut us off.
So you pissed off about that?
Yeah, he flipped us off.
And he gave you the finger? And that pissed you off?
Yeah.
And that's why you shot?
So like, where is this tape gonna be showed at court?
No, it's about, yeah. I mean, this is all a part of the investigation. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, yeah, I did like that.
What?
I'm gonna be honest with you, boss.
Mm-hmm.
Had it been somebody else, I wouldn't even have told him.
We set the foundation where he could talk and made him comfortable. And that way he felt as if he could talk to me. I'm gonna be honest with you, you're gonna be charged with murder tonight, okay?
Well, let me ask you this straight up, man, like, you tell me I'm young, I got my whole life ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
I made this mistake.
Mm-hmm.
How long you think they're gonna get me?
You know, I don't know. I don't make those decisions. I'm not gonna lie to you.
What kind of murder is it?
It's murder.
It's murder?
Yeah.
He finally sank over in his chair and you saw his shoulders drop and his head drop, and it seemed like the full acceptance was finally there. He realized this show was over. There wasn't any more denial. There wasn't any more covering it up.
honestly think that his ego got the best of him that night that led up to the victim's death. And once you pull that trigger, you have to take ownership, knowing that that bullet can come out that gun, and if it hits someone, it can kill somebody.
Miss Walker, for her involvement in this, she was charged with a single count of accessory after the fact and received 4 years of federal probation. This type of crime is a perfect example of what a senseless murder would be defined as. Even if there was a traffic altercation in some way, no one deserves to be shot at. It seemed like this was a situation, just the wrong place and the wrong time, and that's what's so unfortunate in this case.
When it comes down to homicide, it takes a special person mentally to do this job. You think about bringing some kind of closure to the family, but not saying they're going to get closure. Because you're talking about you taking a piece of their heart away when their loved one had passed away.
Do I feel as if justice was served? I don't. He only got 30 years in prison. He'll still get to walk free on this earth where my uncle couldn't anymore because he took his life away.
I was very appreciative of the officers and the detective of all the hard work and the jobs that they did. I was happy that person was finally off of the street. I miss Tony very much. There's really never not a time I'm not thinking about him because he was really a great man and is very well missed. And it just hurts, man.
On the morning of Monday, February 27th, 1995, the quiet rhythm of daily life in Springfield, Missouri, began much like it always had. Commuters filled the roads on their way to work. Schools prepared to welcome students into classrooms. Businesses unlocked their doors, expecting another ordinary day. In neighborhoods across the city, the routines of family life unfolded with familiar predictability. But on one quiet residential street in the southwest part of Springfield, something was terribly wrong. It was not the kind of wrong that announced itself with flashing lights or frantic screams. Instead, it revealed itself through silence. Cheryl Feeney never arrived at work that morning. At first, her absence may not have seemed alarming. People oversleep. Cars refuse to start. Children become sick without warning. Life often interrupts carefully planned schedules. Yet as the morning hours passed, concern slowly replaced routine. Cheryl was known to be dependable. Failing to appear without notifying anyone was unlike her. Calls were placed to the Feeney home, but no one answered. The telephone rang into an empty silence. Minutes became hours. The unanswered calls began to feel less like an inconvenience and more like the first indication that something had gone terribly wrong. Concern eventually prompted two people to visit the family home. One was Cheryl's coworker, worried after realizing that her colleague had simply disappeared from the normal routine of the workday. The other was John Feeney's mother, Ola Feeney. Together, they approached the quiet house expecting, perhaps, to discover an innocent explanation. Maybe Cheryl had become ill. Maybe the children needed attention. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. None of those possibilities prepared them for what waited inside. When they entered the residence, they discovered a scene that would forever alter the lives of everyone connected to the Feeney family. Inside the home lay three victims. Cheryl Feeney, 36 years old, her 6-year-old son, Tyler, and Jennifer, the family's 18-month-old daughter. Three members of one family had been killed inside the place where they should have been safest. Within minutes, emergency responders and police officers arrived at the residence. The neighborhood that had awakened expecting an ordinary Monday morning suddenly found itself transformed into an active homicide scene. Patrol cars blocked the street. Crime scene investigators began documenting every room. Detectives moved carefully through the house, knowing that every object, every footprint, every misplaced item might eventually help explain what had happened during the previous night. At first glance, the home presented a confusing picture. Drawers had been pulled open. Belongings were scattered throughout several rooms. Furniture and personal possessions appeared disturbed. Certain pieces of jewelry were missing, yet money remained inside the residence. To experienced investigators, that inconsistency immediately raised difficult questions. Burglars usually seek valuables that can quickly be sold, and cash is often among the easiest targets. Why would someone take jewelry while leaving money behind? Was this truly a burglary interrupted by violence? Or had the appearance of a robbery been deliberately created to mislead investigators? That question would become one of many that refused to produce an easy answer. As detectives continued examining the house, the mystery only deepened. Family photographs had been turned face down. They had not been smashed or stolen. Someone had simply reversed them, concealing the smiling faces that had once represented ordinary family memories. Elsewhere, investigators noticed signs suggesting that the back door may have been tampered with. Initially, it appeared to show evidence of forced entry, but closer inspection suggested that parts of the locking mechanism might have been unscrewed rather than violently broken. If that observation proved accurate, it carried important implications. Had someone attempted to stage a break-in after the murders had already occurred? The garage introduced another layer of confusion. Cheryl's vehicle had been partially loaded with household belongings, as though someone intended to remove property from the residence. Yet the vehicle remained exactly where it belonged. A battery charger had been connected to the car despite the battery functioning normally. Investigators could not immediately explain why anyone would spend valuable time performing such an unnecessary action inside a murder scene. Every unusual detail seemed to create another unanswered question instead of bringing detectives closer to understanding the truth. Perhaps the most unsettling discoveries, however, were found inside the bedroom. Cheryl Feeney's body rested there after suffering repeated blunt force injuries inflicted by what investigators believed had been a heavy metal object. Nearby, detectives documented additional evidence pointing toward extraordinary violence. Elsewhere in the house, 6-year-old Tyler had suffered similar fatal injuries, leading investigators to believe that the same type of weapon had been used against both mother and son. Jennifer's death, however, differed in a way that immediately attracted investigators' attention. The 18-month-old child had not been killed by blunt force trauma. Instead, she had been strangled using what investigators described as a cord similar to a curtain tie or another comparable type of cord. The difference in method became one of the earliest mysteries confronting detectives. Why would a single offender use one method to kill 2 victims, but an entirely different one for the youngest child? Was there a practical explanation, an emotional one? Or did the differing methods suggest the possibility that more than one individual had participated in the crime? At that early stage, investigators simply did not know. As crime scene technicians carefully documented every room, another disturbing discovery emerged. Painted on the wall were 2 words, "bitch" and "die." The crude messages immediately drew attention because they appeared almost theatrical in their placement. Detectives debated what they represented. Were these words left by the killer in genuine anger? Or were they placed there afterward to manufacture the appearance of a different type of crime? If someone had taken the time to locate paint and write messages on the wall after committing 3 murders, that decision suggested a willingness to remain inside the home longer than many offenders would normally risk. Again, investigators found themselves facing possibilities rather than conclusions. Every answer seemed to branch into multiple new questions. While detectives processed the scene in Springfield, another crucial fact quickly emerged. John Feeney, Cheryl's husband and the children's father, had not been at the family home during the weekend. He had traveled approximately 250 kilometers away to attend a science teachers conference at the Tantare Resort near the Lake of the Ozarks. John was not merely an attendee. He had served as a presenter during the conference, and numerous individuals would later confirm seeing him there. At first glance, his presence away from Springfield appeared to provide a straightforward explanation for why he could not have committed the murders. Yet investigators soon realized that geography alone could not fully eliminate the possibility. The distance between the conference and Springfield was significant but not impossible to drive. Within several hours, that realization transformed what initially appeared to be an alibi into one of the central controversies of the entire investigation. Did John remain at the conference throughout the night, exactly as appearances suggested? Or was there sufficient time for him to leave, travel back to Springfield, commit the murders, and return before anyone noticed his absence? That single question would eventually dominate both the investigation and the courtroom. Before detectives examined insurance policies, before attorneys debated circumstantial evidence, before jurors listened to weeks of testimony, there existed only the silent house and 3 victims whose lives had ended under circumstances that defied simple explanation. Cheryl Feeney had left for no destination that morning because she never lived to see the sunrise. Tyler would never return to school. Jennifer would never grow beyond infancy. Their home, once an ordinary suburban residence, had become the center of one of Missouri's most perplexing homicide investigations. More than 3 decades later, many of the questions first asked on that February morning remain unanswered. Who entered the Feeney home during the night of February 26, 1995? Why were 3 members of one family killed using 2 different methods? Why did the scene appear to contain signs of both violence and possible staging? And perhaps most importantly, if every clue seemed to point in a different direction, how could investigators ever determine which path led to the truth? Those questions marked only the beginning of a case that would challenge detectives, divide legal experts, and leave an enduring scar on everyone connected to the Feeney family. Springfield, Missouri, in the mid-1990s, was a city that balanced steady growth with the familiarity of small-town life. It was large enough to support thriving schools, local businesses, and expanding neighborhoods, yet small enough that many residents still recognize familiar faces at grocery stores, churches, and community events. Families built routines around school schedules, weekend errands, and neighborhood gatherings. Streets in the southwestern part of the city were lined with modest homes where children played in. Front yards and neighbors exchanged casual greetings across driveways. It was the kind of place where people generally believed they knew who lived nearby and where. Violent crime felt like something that happened somewhere else. For the Feeney family, this neighborhood represented stability. It was the place where they built their daily lives, raised their children, and expected ordinary tomorrows. Nothing about their home suggested that it would one day become the center of an investigation that would remain unsolved for decades. Before their names became associated with newspaper headlines and courtroom testimony, they were simply another family living an unremarkable suburban life. At the heart of that family was Cheryl Feeney, 36 years old in February 1995. Cheryl was remembered not as a public figure or someone seeking attention, but as a wife, a mother, and a working professional who balanced the demands of family life with her responsibilities outside the home. Like countless parents across America, her days revolved around practical routines rather than dramatic events. There were schedules to maintain, meals to prepare, responsibilities to meet, and 2 young children whose needs shaped nearly every hour of her day. Friends and co-workers knew her as dependable, a characteristic that would later become one of the earliest reasons concern arose when she unexpectedly failed to appear for work on the morning of February 27th. In hindsight, that missed day at work became the first unmistakable sign that something had interrupted a routine she rarely broke. Cheryl's identity, however, extended beyond employment. She was the emotional center of a household raising two children at very different stages of life. Tyler Feeney, 6 years old, was old enough to attend school, develop friendships, and begin discovering the world beyond the walls of his family home. At 6 years old, childhood is often filled with curiosity. Every day introduces new experiences, new questions, and new opportunities to learn. Although the surviving records provide only limited personal details about Tyler's personality, one fact remains impossible to ignore. He was a child whose future had barely begun. The milestones that define childhood, birthdays, school graduations, first jobs, adulthood, would never arrive. Every possibility ended inside the family home during a single night in February 1995. The youngest member of the family, Jennifer Feeney, was only 18 months old. At that age, life is measured not in accomplishments, but in moments of rapid growth. First words, first memories, first lasting experiences still lay ahead. Jennifer depended entirely upon the adults around her for protection and care. She had lived less than 2 years before becoming one of the youngest victims in a homicide case that continues to haunt investigators decades later. Cases involving children often carry a particular emotional weight because they represent futures, permanently erased before those futures have any opportunity to unfold. Jennifer's death would later become especially difficult for investigators to understand because the method used to kill her differed from the one used against her mother and brother, introducing questions that have never been fully answered. Completing the family was John Feeney. Professionally, John worked as a chemistry teacher at Glendale High School in Springfield. Teaching science requires patience, preparation, and the ability to communicate complex ideas clearly to students. His career reflected someone invested in education. And in late February 1995, he traveled to attend a science teachers conference at the Tantaray Resort near the Lake of the Ozarks. This was not an ordinary vacation or a casual weekend away. John was participating as a presenter during the conference, meaning his attendance was expected and visible to numerous fellow educators. That detail would eventually become one of the most significant aspects of the investigation. Multiple people later confirmed seeing him at the conference, creating what initially appeared to be a strong alibi. Yet, as investigators would eventually argue, being seen at certain points during the weekend did not necessarily account for every hour. Long before prosecutors developed that theory, however, John was simply another educator spending a professional weekend among colleagues while his family remained at home. From the outside, the Feeneys appeared to represent an ordinary American household. Neighbors described them as a typical family living quietly within the community. There were no widely known reports of repeated domestic disturbances or violent confrontations that drew attention from those living nearby. Nothing about the family's public image foreshadowed the tragedy that would soon unfold. Yet investigations often reveal aspects of private lives that remain hidden from casual observers. And the Feeney case proved no different. As detectives began examining the family's background after the murders, they uncovered information suggesting that the marriage between John and Cheryl was experiencing difficulties. According to investigators, John had engaged in relationships with several female co-workers. Those affairs became an important part of the prosecution's eventual theory because they suggested marital strain and provided a possible motive for murder. The existence of those relationships did not establish guilt, nor did they explain what happened inside the house during the final weekend of February. However, they significantly influenced how investigators viewed the case. A marriage that once appeared ordinary now became subject to far greater scrutiny. Prosecutors would later argue that the relationship had deteriorated. The defense, meanwhile, would emphasize that troubled marriages, while unfortunate, are not evidence of homicide. This distinction would become central during the trial, where circumstantial evidence rather than direct forensic proof dominated nearly every argument. In retrospect, One of the most striking aspects of the Feeney family story is how ordinary everything appeared before the murders. There were no public warnings that violence was imminent. No documented events during the days leading directly to the crime suggested that the family stood on the edge of catastrophe. The neighborhood remained quiet. Daily routines continued. Cheryl cared for the children while John prepared for his professional conference. Like countless weekends before it, late February 1995 seemed destined to disappear into memory without distinction. Instead, it became one of the most examined weekends in Missouri criminal history. Every decision made during those final days would later be reconstructed by investigators searching for answers. Every confirmed sighting would be analyzed. Every telephone call would acquire new significance. Every hour would be examined in extraordinary detail. Yet at the time those moments occurred, none of the people living through them had any reason to believe they were participating in events that would later be dissected in police reports and courtroom testimony. The contrast between the family's outward normalcy and the violence that followed remains one of the defining characteristics of this case. It serves as a reminder that many homicide investigations begin not with obvious signs of danger, but with lives that appear, at least from the outside, entirely ordinary. Before Cheryl became a victim, she was a mother planning another week. Before Tyler became evidence in a homicide investigation, he was a 6-year-old child with his future ahead of him. Before Jennifer's name appeared in police reports, she was a toddler whose life had scarcely begun. And before John Feeney became the focus of one of Missouri's most controversial murder prosecutions, he was a high school chemistry teacher preparing to spend a weekend among fellow educators hundreds of kilometers away. Understanding who the Feeneys were before the murders is essential because the investigation would soon shift away from ordinary family life and toward extraordinary questions. The peaceful image of their home would be replaced by photographs of a devastated crime scene. Familiar routines would give way to forensic examinations, conflicting legal arguments, and unanswered mysteries. But before investigators processed fingerprints, examined footprints, or debated whether a burglary had been staged, there was one final weekend during which life appeared, at least on the surface, entirely normal. It would be the last weekend the Feeney family would ever spend together. The final weekend of the Feeney family's life began without any obvious indication that it would become one of the most closely examined periods in the history of an unsolved Missouri homicide. Like countless weekends before it, February 25th and 26th, 1995, appeared ordinary. There were no publicly documented emergencies, no reported disturbances from neighbors, and no dramatic events that would have suggested tragedy was approaching. It was this very ordinariness that would later make the investigation so difficult. Detectives were not reconstructing a weekend marked by chaos or visible conflict. Instead, they were trying to understand how an apparently routine series of events ended with 3 members of the same family murdered inside their own home. On Saturday, February 25th, John Feeney left Springfield to attend a science teachers conference held at the Tantaré Resort near the Lake of the Ozarks. The conference was a professional event that brought together educators from different schools, providing opportunities to exchange ideas and discuss developments in science education. John was not simply attending as a participant. According to the available records, he was also serving as a presenter, meaning his presence at the conference was expected and observed by numerous colleagues. This detail would later become critically important because it established that John had been seen by multiple people during the weekend. At the time, however, no one viewed the trip as unusual. Teachers regularly attended conferences as part of their professional responsibilities, and weekends away for educational events were hardly extraordinary. As John traveled approximately 250 kilometers away from Springfield, Cheryl remained at the family home with their 2 children, Tyler and Jennifer. Nothing in the available evidence suggests that Saturday unfolded differently from what one might expect for a young family spending the weekend together. There are no reports describing arguments, visitors, or unusual activity. The family simply continued with what appeared to be the normal rhythm of everyday life. In retrospect, the absence of dramatic events is itself significant. Investigators would later search carefully for any clue that could identify when the family's ordinary weekend began transforming into something far more sinister. But the surviving information offers no clear indication that anyone recognized danger before it arrived. Sunday, February 26th, also appeared uneventful during the daytime. According to information gathered during the investigation, some neighbors reported seeing Cheryl during the day. Those sightings became important because they helped investigators narrow the timeline, confirming that Cheryl was alive at least for part of Sunday. Although these observations could not determine precisely when the murders occurred, they established that daily life continued normally through much of the weekend. Cheryl was seen going about her routine, unaware that she and her children had entered the final day of their lives. As daylight faded into evening, the timeline becomes less certain. One of the most discussed elements of the case involves a series of telephone calls made by John from the conference. According to the investigation, John attempted to call home multiple times on Sunday evening. Each time, no one answered. On the surface, this fact seems simple. A husband away on a work-related trip tried to contact his family. The phone rang unanswered. Such situations happen every day. Families miss calls for countless ordinary reasons. Parents may be putting children to bed. They may be occupied in another room. They may simply choose not to answer immediately. Under normal circumstances, repeated unanswered calls would hardly attract attention. But nothing about the Feeney case remained normal after the bodies were discovered. Once investigators knew that Cheryl and the children had been killed sometime during the night, those unanswered phone calls acquired an entirely different significance. Prosecutors and defense attorneys would eventually interpret the same evidence in dramatically different ways. To the prosecution, the unanswered calls were not merely unsuccessful attempts to reach home. They argued that John's behavior deserved closer scrutiny. According to their theory, the calls could have been placed because John already knew that no one would answer. In other words, the calls might have been intended to create the appearance of concern while supporting an alibi. This interpretation became one piece of a broader circumstantial argument that prosecutors would later present in court. It is important to recognize, however, that this conclusion depended entirely upon accepting the prosecution's overall theory of the case. The telephone calls themselves did not prove that John had committed the murders. They simply became another fact whose meaning was debated. The defense viewed those same phone calls very differently. From their perspective, a husband attempting to reach his wife and children while away at a conference represented entirely normal behavior. Families often communicate during short business trips. Missing a call does not automatically suggest foul play, nor does making repeated attempts imply prior knowledge of a crime. The defense argued that prosecutors were interpreting an ordinary action through the lens of events that had only become known afterward. In their view, the calls demonstrated nothing more than a husband trying unsuccessfully to contact his family. This disagreement illustrates one of the defining characteristics of the Feeney investigation. Many pieces of evidence were not disputed because they existed. Rather, they were disputed because of what investigators believed they meant. The facts themselves often remained unchanged, while their interpretation differed dramatically depending on who was presenting the case. As Sunday night progressed, the available evidence becomes increasingly limited. No confirmed witness has been identified as observing the murders themselves. No direct account exists describing who entered the Feeney home, when they entered, or precisely what unfolded inside. Investigators concluded that the killings occurred sometime between the night of February 26th and the early morning hours of February 27th. But the exact sequence of events has never been established with certainty. This uncertainty would later complicate nearly every aspect of the investigation. Without eyewitnesses or definitive forensic evidence placing a specific individual inside the residence during the murders, detectives were forced to reconstruct the timeline using indirect evidence. Every known event before the murders therefore assumed greater importance. John's departure to the conference. Cheryl remaining at home. Neighbors seeing Cheryl during Sunday. The unanswered telephone calls. Each became a marker along a timeline interrupted by violence whose precise beginning remained unknown. At some point during that night, someone entered the Feeney residence. Whether that person arrived through deception, familiarity, or force remains unresolved. Investigators would later question whether the apparent signs of forced entry had been staged after the fact, making even the point of entry uncertain. Inside the home, 3 lives were taken. Cheryl and Tyler suffered repeated blunt force injuries inflicted with what investigators believed to be a heavy metal object. Jennifer was killed by ligature strangulation using a cord similar to a curtain tie or another comparable cord. Why 2 methods were used has never been conclusively explained. After the killings, the perpetrator or perpetrators, if more than one individual was involved, left behind a scene filled with contradictions. Drawers were opened, possessions scattered, jewelry missing, cash untouched. Family photographs turned face down, strange words painted on the walls, and Cheryl's vehicle partially loaded with belongings while remaining in the garage. Every unusual detail appeared to raise another question rather than answer an existing one. Yet none of those discoveries would be made until the following morning, when Cheryl failed to arrive at work and concern prompted others to visit the home. Throughout Sunday night, while investigators unknowingly slept in their own homes and Springfield remained unaware that one of its most disturbing crimes had already occurred, the Feeney residence stood silent. Nothing alerted neighbors that 3 people inside had lost their lives. There were no publicly documented emergency calls from the house, no reports that immediately drew police to the neighborhood during the night, and no known witness who came forward describing the crime as it happened. By the time daylight returned on Monday morning, whatever had occurred inside the residence had already become part of the past. The offender had disappeared, taking with them perhaps the only complete knowledge of what truly happened during those final hours. Looking back more than 3 decades later, investigators, journalists, and those who have studied the case continue to return to that final weekend because it represents the last period in which the facts remain relatively straightforward. John traveled to a professional conference. Cheryl stayed home with Tyler and Jennifer. Neighbors reported seeing Cheryl on Sunday. John made repeated telephone calls home that evening without receiving an answer. Beyond those established points, certainty quickly gives way to unanswered questions. The transition from an ordinary weekend to an unsolved triple homicide occurred somewhere within those missing hours, hidden behind silence that no investigation has ever fully penetrated. The challenge facing detectives was no longer simply identifying a suspect. It was understanding a crime whose most critical moments had unfolded without witnesses, leaving behind only physical evidence, competing interpretations, and mysteries that remain unresolved to this day. By the time police officers arrived at the Feeney residence on the morning of February 27, 1995, the events that had unfolded during the previous night were already beyond recovery. Whatever confrontation had taken place, whatever words had been spoken, whatever sequence of actions had led to the deaths of Cheryl Feeney and her 2 children had vanished with the passing hours. What remained was a silent house filled with physical evidence, and it would become the responsibility of investigators to determine whether those pieces of evidence revealed the truth or concealed it. From the very beginning, detectives understood that this was not simply a homicide investigation. It was a scene that appeared to contain layers of contradiction. Every room seemed to offer clues, but almost every clue suggested more than one possible interpretation. As investigators carefully documented the residence, they immediately noticed signs that the home had been disturbed. Drawers had been pulled open, cabinets and closets had been searched. Personal belongings were scattered throughout several rooms. Furniture appeared out of place. At first glance, these observations seemed consistent with a burglary. Yet experienced investigators are trained to look beyond appearances. And almost immediately something about the scene failed to fit the pattern of a typical residential robbery. Several pieces of jewelry were missing from the home. Cheryl's wallet was also gone. Ordinarily, those facts might support the theory that someone entered the residence intending to steal valuables. However, another discovery complicated that conclusion. Cash remained inside the house. For investigators, this detail raised an important question. Why would a burglar take jewelry while ignoring money that could be carried away just as easily? Although every burglary is different, criminals motivated primarily by theft generally seize cash whenever they have the opportunity. Leaving it behind suggested that robbery might not have been the true purpose of entering the home. Detectives, therefore, began considering another possibility. Perhaps the appearance of burglary had been deliberately created after the murders. If that were true, the scattered belongings, open drawers, and missing property might represent an attempt to mislead investigators rather than evidence of the offender's original motive. As crime scene technicians moved deeper into the residence, they reached the bedroom where Cheryl Feeney was found. She lay face down on a waterbed. The position of her body and the nature of her injuries immediately indicated the extreme violence of the attack. According to the medical findings, Cheryl had suffered repeated blunt force trauma to her head and face. Investigators believe the injuries were inflicted with a heavy metal object, possibly a section of metal pipe or another similarly weighted instrument. The force used during the assault was devastating, causing catastrophic injuries to her skull. There was no indication that she had been shot or stabbed. Instead, the attack relied entirely upon repeated blows delivered with considerable force. Such injuries suggested a prolonged and violent assault rather than a single impulsive strike. Yet despite the severity of the attack, investigators never recovered the weapon believed to have caused Cheryl's fatal injuries. Whoever committed the murders apparently left the residence carrying the object used to kill both Cheryl and her son. The absence of the murder weapon would become one of the investigation's greatest obstacles. Without it, detectives lost an important opportunity to identify fingerprints, biological evidence, or other forensic traces that might have connected a suspect directly to the crime. Elsewhere in the house, investigators found 6-year-old Tyler Feeney. The injuries he suffered closely resembled those inflicted upon his mother. Medical examiners concluded that Tyler had also died from repeated blunt force trauma, likely delivered by the same type of heavy metal object. The similarities between Cheryl's and Tyler's wounds led investigators to believe that one weapon had probably been used in both killings. This consistency suggested a common sequence of violence. However, that pattern abruptly changed when detectives examined the youngest victim. Jennifer Feeney, only 18 months old, had not been beaten. Instead, investigators determined that she died by ligature strangulation. Reports described the ligature as a cord resembling a curtain tie or another similar type of cord, available inside the residence. This difference immediately became one of the most perplexing features of the case. If the offender had already used a heavy blunt object to kill Cheryl and Tyler, why abandon that method when killing Jennifer? Investigators discussed several possibilities, but none could be confirmed by the available evidence. Perhaps the offender changed methods for reasons known only to them. Perhaps circumstances inside the house evolved during the attack. Or perhaps more than one individual participated in the murders, with different offenders using different methods. The physical evidence alone could not answer those questions. Consequently, the differing causes of death remained one of the strongest arguments for investigators who believe the crime scene contained complexities extending beyond a straightforward domestic homicide or burglary. While documenting the bedroom, investigators encountered another disturbing element that quickly became one of the defining images associated with the Feeney murders. Painted on the wall were 2 words, "Bitch" and "Die." The letters appeared hastily applied, lacking artistic precision or careful planning. Their presence immediately sparked disagreement among investigators. Some questioned whether the messages reflected genuine anger directed toward Cheryl. Others believe the writing looked artificial, almost as though someone had deliberately added it after the killings to create a misleading impression. The debate centered not only on the words themselves, but also on the practical implications of writing them. If the offender had just committed 3 murders inside a private residence, why remain at the scene long enough to locate paint and leave written messages? Every additional minute inside the house increased the risk of discovery. Remaining voluntarily after committing the murders seemed unusually dangerous unless the offender believed there was a compelling reason to stage the scene. Although no definitive conclusion could be reached, many investigators regarded the painted words as possible evidence that the crime scene had been manipulated. Another unusual discovery reinforced that suspicion. Throughout the residence, family photographs had been turned face down. They had not been removed from the home, broken, or vandalized. Someone had simply reversed them so that the images no longer faced outward. Investigators struggled to explain this behavior. The action required time yet accomplished no obvious practical purpose. If the offender intended only to steal valuables, turning photographs over served no benefit. If the crime resulted from personal anger, one might expect the photographs to be destroyed rather than quietly turned away. Because no explanation clearly fit the evidence, the photographs joined the growing list of mysteries that defined the investigation. Attention also focused on the back door of the residence. Initial observations suggested forced entry. Damage around the locking mechanism appeared consistent with someone attempting to break into the home. However, closer examination complicated that assumption. Detectives noted that parts of the locking mechanism appeared to have been unscrewed rather than violently forced open. If accurate, this finding carried significant implications. A door intentionally altered after the murders could create the false appearance that an unknown intruder had entered the residence from outside. Once again, investigators faced competing possibilities. Was the damage genuine evidence of unlawful entry? Or was it another element of an elaborate staging effort? The physical evidence could not resolve the question with certainty. The garage provided still another puzzling scene. Cheryl's vehicle remained parked inside, but investigators discovered that various household belongings had already been loaded into the car. At first glance, this arrangement seemed consistent with someone preparing to steal property. Yet the vehicle had not been driven away. Stranger still, a battery charger had been connected to the car, even though subsequent examination determined that the battery functioned normally. Detectives found no mechanical reason why the charger needed to be attached. The purpose of this action remains unknown. Did the offender intend to use the vehicle but abandon the plan? Was the charger connected merely to create confusion? Or did it serve some other purpose that investigators never identified? Like so many other aspects of the scene, no definitive answer emerged. Crime scene technicians continued collecting physical evidence wherever possible. Among the items documented were unidentified hairs found on Cheryl's bloodstained nightgown. Investigators also recorded a shoe print bearing traces of paint. Significantly, the shoe print appeared smaller than John Feeney's shoe size. Although these findings suggested the possibility that another individual had been present, they did not identify who that person might have been. DNA technology in 1995 lacked the capabilities available decades later, and investigators were unable to obtain forensic evidence sufficient to conclusively identify the offender. The unknown hairs remained unidentified. The shoe print could not be linked to a specific suspect. The murder weapon was never recovered. As the first day of the investigation came to an end, detectives had assembled an extraordinary collection of physical evidence. Yet instead of producing a coherent narrative, the evidence generated contradiction after contradiction. The house appeared ransacked, but cash remained behind. Jewelry disappeared, but expensive time was apparently spent turning photographs over. Violent blunt force attacks killed Cheryl and Tyler, while Jennifer died by strangulation. Painted messages suggested rage, yet investigators questioned whether they had been staged. The back door appeared damaged, but perhaps not in the way it first seemed. A vehicle was loaded with belongings, but never moved. Unknown hairs and an unexplained shoe print hinted at another person's presence. Yet no one could identify whose they were. Each clue pointed in a different direction. Instead of simplifying the investigation, the crime scene multiplied its complexity. Detectives left the Feeney home carrying boxes of evidence, photographs, measurements, and forensic samples. They hoped laboratory analysis and careful investigation would gradually reveal how these seemingly disconnected pieces fit together. But as the days turned into weeks, one unsettling reality became increasingly clear. The crime scene had preserved many details of what happened inside the house. What it had not preserved was the identity of the person responsible. That missing answer would shape every stage of the investigation that followed. In the days following the discovery of the murders, the investigation entered its most demanding phase. The initial shock of finding 3 members of the same family dead inside their home gradually gave way to the painstaking work of collecting evidence, reconstructing timelines, and testing every possible explanation against the facts. Detectives understood that the first days after a homicide are often the most critical. Witnesses' memories are still fresh. Physical evidence has not yet deteriorated, and every unanswered question has the potential to lead investigators toward, or away from, the truth. Yet from the beginning, the Feeney case resisted straightforward answers. Instead of following a clear investigative path, detectives found themselves navigating a maze of conflicting evidence, unusual crime scene characteristics, and competing theories about what had happened inside the house during the night of February 26, 1995. Every piece of evidence collected from the residence underwent careful examination. Crime scene investigators documented the condition of every room, photographed disturbed furniture, cataloged missing property, and preserved any physical trace that might later identify the offender. Their search extended beyond the obvious signs of violence. Floors, walls, clothing, doors, and personal belongings were examined for fingerprints, fibers, biological material, footprints, and any other forensic evidence capable of reconstructing the events inside the home. Yet despite the extensive processing of the scene, one of the most important pieces of evidence remained missing from the very beginning: the murder weapon. Investigators believed that Cheryl and Tyler had been killed with a heavy metal object, possibly a section of metal pipe or a similar instrument capable of inflicting repeated blunt force trauma. However, despite searching the residence and surrounding areas, detectives never recovered such a weapon. Its disappearance suggested that whoever committed the murders had carried it away before leaving the scene. Without the weapon, investigators lost an opportunity to recover fingerprints, biological traces, or other forensic evidence that might have directly connected an individual to the crime. The absence of the murder weapon became one of the investigation's most persistent frustrations. Alongside the search for the weapon, detectives analyzed the physical evidence collected from the victims and the residents. Among the findings were several unidentified hairs recovered from Cheryl's bloodstained nightgown. At first glance, such evidence appeared promising. Hair can sometimes establish contact between a victim and another individual. However, identifying the source proved far more difficult than investigators had hoped. The available forensic technology and the evidence itself did not produce a conclusive identification. The hairs remained exactly what they had been when first collected, evidence that someone unknown might have been present, but not evidence capable of proving who that person was. Another important forensic observation involved a shoe print discovered within the residence. The print contained traces of paint, linking it to activity inside the home after paint had apparently been used to write the words "bitch" and "die" on the wall. Detectives carefully examined its size and characteristics. One detail immediately attracted attention. The shoe print appeared smaller than John Feeney's shoe size. This observation became significant because investigators were simultaneously evaluating whether John himself could have committed the murders. If the print belonged to the offender, It suggested the presence of someone whose footwear differed from John's. Yet once again, certainty proved elusive. A single shoe print, without additional identifying characteristics or a known owner, could not establish the identity of the person who left it behind. It simply became another unresolved piece of the puzzle. Investigators also considered the forensic limitations of the time. Modern audiences often associate homicide investigations with rapid DNA identification and highly detailed genetic analysis. In 1995, however, those technologies were far less advanced than they are today. Although biological evidence was collected wherever possible, investigators were unable to obtain DNA evidence sufficient to conclusively identify the killer or prove that John Feeney had committed the murders. The absence of definitive DNA evidence did not eliminate any suspect, but neither did it provide prosecutors with the direct forensic link they often seek in homicide cases. As laboratory examinations continued, detectives broadened the scope of the investigation beyond physical evidence alone. One unexpected detail soon drew their attention. Tyler Feeney had been diagnosed with hepatitis B. According to the investigative records, neither parent appeared to be the source of the infection. This fact prompted investigators to explore whether Tyler might have had significant contact with someone outside the immediate family who could also become relevant to the homicide investigation. Detectives examined whether the illness suggested another adult had maintained unusually close contact with the child, potentially opening an entirely different avenue of inquiry. However, despite exploring this possibility, investigators found no evidence establishing any connection between Tyler's medical condition and the murders themselves. The inquiry ultimately produced no suspect and no direct investigative breakthrough. Although the hepatitis B diagnosis remains one of the unusual details associated with the case, it has never been supported by evidence demonstrating that it played any role in the killings. As days became weeks, investigators increasingly focused their attention on John Feeney. This shift did not occur because detectives had uncovered direct evidence placing him inside the house during the murders. Instead, it developed through the gradual accumulation of circumstantial factors that, taken together, prompted investigators to examine him more closely than any other individual. The first of those factors involved life insurance. Detectives learned that only months before the murders, John had increased Cheryl's life insurance coverage by approximately $250,000. Standing alone, purchasing life insurance is not unusual. Families commonly obtain or increase coverage as financial circumstances change. Nevertheless, when such a policy is followed by a homicide, investigators naturally consider whether financial gain could represent a possible motive. Prosecutors would later argue that the insurance policy formed one element of a broader pattern, suggesting intent. The defense, however, would emphasize that owning life insurance is neither uncommon nor evidence of murder. Another important aspect of the investigation centered on John's personal relationships. Detectives confirmed that he had engaged in affairs with several female coworkers. These relationships supported the prosecution's argument that the marriage between John and Cheryl had been deteriorating before the murders. Investigators examined whether marital difficulties might have provided a motive for violence. Again, however, this evidence remained circumstantial. Affairs may reveal problems within a marriage, but they do not establish that a homicide occurred. Throughout the investigation, detectives had to distinguish between evidence suggesting possible motive and evidence proving criminal responsibility. Opportunity became the next major focus. John had attended the Science Teachers Conference approximately 250 kilometers from Springfield. Numerous witnesses confirmed seeing him there during the weekend. At first, this appeared to provide a substantial alibi. Yet investigators carefully reconstructed travel times between the conference and the Feeney residence. They concluded that, while demanding, it was theoretically possible for someone to leave the conference, drive to Springfield during the night, commit the murders, and return before attracting attention. This possibility became one of the central pillars of the prosecution's future case. Importantly, investigators did not possess eyewitness testimony placing John on the road or inside Springfield during the critical hours. Their conclusion addressed possibility rather than direct observation. The distinction between what was possible and what was proven would later become one of the defining issues during the trial. Detectives also returned repeatedly to the condition of the crime scene itself. The apparent burglary, the painted words on the wall, the disturbed furniture, the missing jewelry, the untouched cash, the partially loaded vehicle, the reversed family photographs, and the questionable signs of forced entry all appeared capable of supporting one broad theory: that someone had deliberately staged portions of the scene after committing the murders. Investigators asked themselves a crucial question. If the scene had indeed been manipulated, who possessed both the knowledge and the opportunity to construct such a deception? This line of reasoning increasingly influenced the direction of the investigation. Yet despite months of work, detectives encountered the same fundamental obstacle again and again. No witness reported seeing John leave the conference. No forensic evidence conclusively placed him inside the house during the murders. No murder weapon linked him to the crime. No confession existed. At the same time, investigators could not identify another suspect whose involvement was supported by stronger evidence. Unknown hairs remained unidentified. The shoe print remained unmatched. The unusual crime scene resisted simple explanation. The investigation gradually narrowed toward John not because every question had been answered, but because no alternative explanation appeared more convincing to prosecutors. By the time more than a year had passed, investigators believed they had assembled enough circumstantial evidence to move forward with criminal charges. Their case would depend not on a single decisive piece of proof, but on the argument that numerous individual facts, when considered together, pointed toward one conclusion. Whether that conclusion could withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom, however, remained an entirely different question. The investigation had uncovered motives that could be debated, opportunities that could be argued, and evidence that could be interpreted in different ways. What it had not uncovered was the one thing every homicide investigator hopes to find: clear, direct proof identifying the person responsible for the deaths of Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer Feeney. That absence would define everything that followed when the case finally reached trial. More than a year after the murders of Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer Feeney, the investigation reached its most public and consequential stage. Detectives had spent months collecting physical evidence, interviewing witnesses, reconstructing timelines, and examining every known aspect of the family's life. Although many questions remained unanswered, prosecutors concluded that the evidence they had assembled justified criminal charges. John Feeney was formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Accused of killing his wife and 2 children during the night of February 26, 1995. The trial, held in September 1996, immediately attracted significant attention. It was not only because 3 members of one family had been murdered, but also because the man standing trial had never been directly placed at the crime scene. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, requiring jurors to determine whether numerous individual facts, viewed together, established guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. From the beginning of the proceedings, prosecutors acknowledged that they did not possess a confession, eyewitness testimony, or a murder weapon linking John directly to the killings. Instead, they presented a theory that sought to connect motive, opportunity, and the condition of the crime scene into a single narrative. Their argument began with the state of John's marriage. According to the prosecution, the relationship between John and Cheryl had deteriorated before the murders. Investigators had determined that John had engaged in relationships with several female co-workers. Evidence the prosecution argued demonstrated serious marital problems. They suggested that the marriage was no longer stable and that these affairs reflected both personal dissatisfaction and a possible desire to leave the relationship. On its own, however, marital conflict could not establish criminal responsibility. The prosecution therefore introduced another element they believed strengthened their theory: life insurance. Evidence presented during the trial showed that John had increased Cheryl's life insurance coverage by approximately $250,000 only months before her death. Prosecutors argued that the timing of the policy increase was significant. They suggested that the insurance proceeds provided a possible financial motive for murder. Combined with evidence of marital difficulties, they contended that the policy formed part of a larger pattern pointing toward premeditation. The prosecution next turned to what they considered the most controversial aspect of the case: John's apparent alibi. There was little dispute that John attended the science teachers' conference at the Tantare Resort, near the Lake of the Ozarks, during the weekend of the murders. Numerous conference attendees confirmed seeing him there, and he had participated as a presenter. Rather than attempting to deny these facts, prosecutors focused on the time between confirmed sightings. They argued that although the conference was approximately 250 kilometers from Springfield, it was physically possible for John to leave the resort during the night, drive back to Springfield, commit the murders, and then return to the conference before his absence became apparent. Their theory depended not on witnesses who had seen him making the journey, but on the assertion that the trip could have been completed within the available time frame. Opportunity, they argued, existed even if no one directly observed it. Prosecutors also addressed John's repeated telephone calls to the family home on the evening of February 26th. They suggested that these unanswered calls might not have been ordinary attempts to reach his family. Instead, according to their interpretation, the calls could have been made because John already knew no one would answer. They argued that the calls might have been intended to create the appearance of concern while supporting the impression that he remained unaware of the murders. Like much of the prosecution's case, this interpretation depended upon accepting their broader theory of events rather than upon direct evidence proving criminal intent. Another major component of the prosecution's argument centered on the crime scene itself. Detectives had testified about numerous unusual observations inside the Feeney home. The house appeared ransacked, yet cash remained untouched while jewelry was missing. Family photographs had been turned face down rather than destroyed. Cheryl's vehicle had been loaded with household belongings but remained parked in the garage. A battery charger had been attached, even though the battery functioned normally. Words including bitch and die had been painted on a wall. The back door displayed signs that investigators believed might have been created by unscrewing components rather than by genuine forced entry. Prosecutors argued that these features pointed toward a staged crime scene. According to their theory, the apparent burglary, painted messages, and other unusual details had been deliberately created to mislead investigators into believing that an unknown intruder had committed the murders. If the scene had indeed been staged, they argued, it suggested planning rather than a random act of violence. Throughout the trial, prosecutors urged jurors to view each piece of evidence not in isolation, but as part of a cumulative pattern. No single fact, they acknowledged, proved John's guilt by itself. Instead, they argued that marital problems, life insurance, opportunity, unanswered telephone calls, and the allegedly staged crime scene collectively established a compelling case for conviction. The defense approached the case from an entirely different perspective. Rather than attempting to explain every unusual feature of the crime scene, defense attorneys repeatedly reminded jurors of what investigators had failed to discover. Most importantly, they emphasized that no physical evidence conclusively placed John inside the house during the murders. Despite extensive forensic examination, investigators had not identified DNA proving that John committed the killings. At a time when forensic science was becoming increasingly important in criminal investigations, the absence of definitive biological evidence represented a substantial weakness in the prosecution's case. The defense also highlighted the complete absence of eyewitness testimony. No one had seen John leave the conference during the critical hours. No witness observed him driving between the Lake of the Ozarks and Springfield. No person placed him near the Feeney residence during the estimated time of the murders. The prosecution's travel theory, the defense argued, remained entirely speculative. It demonstrated only that such a journey might have been possible, not that it had actually occurred. Defense attorneys further reminded jurors that investigators had never recovered the murder weapon. The heavy metal object believed to have caused Cheryl's and Tyler's fatal injuries remained missing. Without the weapon, prosecutors could not establish any direct forensic connection between John and the killings. The defense also pointed to the unidentified hairs recovered from Cheryl's bloodstained nightgown. Those hairs had never been linked to John. Instead, they represented the presence of unidentified physical evidence that investigators could not explain. Similarly, the shoe print found at the scene appeared smaller than John's shoe size. Defense attorneys argued that this evidence was inconsistent with the prosecution's theory and suggested that another individual might have been present inside the house. They also reminded jurors that investigators had failed to identify who left the print. One of the defense's central arguments concerned the burden of proof. They acknowledged that the crime scene contained numerous unanswered questions and unusual details. However, they argued that uncertainty could not substitute for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Suspicion, regardless of how strong it might appear, was not enough to support a conviction for first-degree murder. Jurors, they argued, were required to base their decision on evidence rather than speculation. The trial ultimately illustrated the profound difference between a case built on circumstantial evidence and one supported by direct proof. Circumstantial evidence can be powerful and has led to many lawful convictions. Yet it also requires jurors to draw inferences from established facts. In the Feeney case, nearly every significant piece of evidence required interpretation. Did the life insurance policy represent ordinary financial planning or preparation for murder? Were the telephone calls expressions of concern or part of a calculated deception? Was the crime scene genuinely staged, and if so, who staged it? Could John have traveled between the conference and Springfield, or did the prosecution rely too heavily on theoretical possibility? These questions became the foundation of the jury's deliberations. After hearing weeks of testimony and considering the arguments presented by both sides, the jury retired to determine whether the prosecution had satisfied its legal burden. Their task was not to decide whether John Feeney had been a perfect husband or whether investigators had raised legitimate suspicions. Instead, they had to determine whether the evidence proved, beyond a reasonable doubt, that he had murdered Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer. On October 5, 1996, the jury returned its verdict. John Feeney was found not guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The acquittal reflected the jury's conclusion that the prosecution had not presented sufficient evidence to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Under the constitutional protection against double jeopardy in the United States, John could not later be tried again for the same murders under the same charges, absent extraordinary legal circumstances. The verdict did not answer the central question that had haunted the investigation from the beginning. It established only that the evidence presented in court was insufficient to convict John Feeney. The identity of the person, or persons, responsible for killing Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer remained unknown. When the trial concluded, the legal proceedings had reached an end, but the investigation's most important mystery remained exactly where it had begun, inside a quiet house in Springfield, where 3 lives had been taken and no definitive explanation had ever been found. When the jury delivered its verdict on October 5, 1996, the criminal trial came to an end, but the Feeney family case itself did not. In many homicide investigations, a verdict, whether guilty or not guilty, marks the conclusion of years of uncertainty. It provides at least one definitive answer within an otherwise tragic story. The Feeney murders were different. The acquittal of John Feeney resolved only one legal question. The prosecution had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was responsible for the murders of Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer. It did not identify another offender. It did not explain the strange evidence found inside the house. It did not answer why 3 members of one family had been killed in 2 different ways. Instead, the verdict left investigators, the victims' loved ones, and the public facing the same mystery that had existed since the morning of February 27, 1995. The courtroom proceedings had ended, but the search for certainty had not. In the weeks following the trial, attention shifted away from criminal prosecution and toward the complicated personal and financial consequences that often follow violent crime. Cheryl's family became involved in a civil legal dispute concerning whether John Feeney should financially benefit from the deaths of his wife and children. Unlike a criminal trial, where the issue is guilt or innocence under the law, civil proceedings often focus on financial interests and legal rights. Cheryl's relatives initiated a civil lawsuit intended to prevent John from receiving financial benefits connected to the deaths. The existence of the lawsuit reflected the deep divisions and unresolved emotions surrounding the case. Even though John had been acquitted in criminal court, questions and suspicions remained within the family and among many observers. Ultimately, however, the civil lawsuit did not proceed to a final judgment. According to the available information, it was later withdrawn. As a result, no civil court reached conclusions regarding responsibility for the murders or financial entitlement. The withdrawal left another chapter of the case unfinished, adding one more unresolved element to an investigation already defined by uncertainty. For law enforcement, the conclusion of the criminal trial did not automatically close the investigation. Detectives had invested enormous time and resources into examining the evidence. Yet the acquittal meant they had not achieved the outcome prosecutors had sought. More importantly, the murders themselves remained officially unsolved. Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer still deserved justice, regardless of the courtroom verdict. As a result, the case continued as an active homicide investigation before eventually becoming classified as a cold case. In criminal investigations, the term cold case does not mean authorities have abandoned the search for answers. Instead, it refers to a case in which active investigative leads have largely been exhausted without identifying or prosecuting the person responsible. Detectives preserve evidence, review files periodically, and remain open to new information that might emerge years or even decades later. The Feeney murders joined that category, becoming one of Missouri's enduring unsolved homicide investigations. As time passed, investigators continued to possess the same collection of physical evidence gathered from the residence in 1995. They still had photographs documenting the condition of the home. They still had forensic reports describing Cheryl's injuries, Tyler's fatal wounds, and Jennifer's ligature strangulation. They still had records concerning the unidentified hairs found on Cheryl's bloodstained nightgown, and a shoe print that appeared smaller than John Feeney's footwear. They still knew that the murder weapon had never been recovered. They still had documentation of the painted words "bitch" and "die" on the wall, the turned-over family photographs, the partially loaded vehicle in the garage, the attached battery charger, the questionable signs of forced entry at the back door, and the missing jewelry that contrasted with untouched cash. Every one of those details remained preserved within investigative files. Yet preserving evidence and understanding evidence are 2 very different things. Despite years of examination, no single piece of physical evidence had succeeded in identifying the person responsible for the murders. This distinction illustrates one of the greatest challenges faced by homicide investigators. A crime scene may contain abundant evidence while still failing to reveal the offender's identity. In the Feeney case, investigators possessed numerous clues, but lacked the one crucial element capable of connecting those clues into a complete narrative. The unidentified hairs remained unidentified. The shoe print remained unmatched. The murder weapon remained missing. The painted words never revealed who had written them. The physical evidence documented what had happened inside the house, but it could not explain who had done it. As the years became decades, the Feeney murders gradually became known beyond Springfield. Among those who study unresolved homicide investigations, the case attracted attention because of the unusual combination of circumstances surrounding it. Few cases present such a striking contrast between apparent evidence and legal outcome. Prosecutors believed they had assembled sufficient circumstantial evidence to bring murder charges against John Feeney. Yet a jury ultimately concluded that the evidence did not eliminate reasonable doubt. At the same time, investigators had not identified another suspect whose involvement could be established through stronger evidence. This left the case occupying a difficult position. The principal suspect had been acquitted, but the murders themselves remained unsolved. Such situations are rare and often become the subject of continued discussion among investigators, journalists, legal analysts, and members of the public. Yet despite the attention the case has received, speculation has never replaced proof. The available facts remain limited to the evidence collected during the original investigation and the testimony presented during the trial. Throughout the years, no new suspect has been publicly charged in connection with the murders. No additional prosecution has occurred. No individual has been convicted. The official status of the case has remained unchanged. It continues to be recognized as an unsolved homicide investigation. For the victims' loved ones, the passage of time does not diminish the consequences of violence. While legal proceedings eventually conclude, families continue living with unanswered questions that may never disappear. Every anniversary of the murders serves as a reminder not only of loss but also of uncertainty. Unlike families whose cases result in convictions, those connected to unsolved homicides often face an additional burden. They must grieve without knowing with certainty who committed the crime or why it happened. In the Feeney case, that uncertainty has endured for more than 3 decades. Cheryl's life ended at the age of 36. Tyler never had the opportunity to grow beyond childhood. Jennifer never experienced a second birthday. Regardless of the unresolved legal questions, those facts remain unchanged. The passage of time has also transformed the investigation itself. Advances in forensic science have changed the way many cold cases are examined. Modern investigative techniques are capable of extracting information from evidence that could not always be analyzed in the mid-1990s. Nevertheless, according to the information available, the Feeney case has not produced the kind of definitive forensic breakthrough that has solved other long unsolved investigations. The evidence continues to exist, but no publicly identified development has resolved the central mystery. Consequently, the murders remain listed among Missouri's notable cold cases. Looking back, one of the most remarkable aspects of the Feeney investigation is not simply that it remains unsolved, but that nearly every major question raised during the original investigation still exists today. The acquittal answered the legal question of whether the prosecution had proven John Feeney's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It did not explain the evidence that puzzled detectives from the first day they entered the house. Why did the offender, or offenders, apparently spend time staging parts of the crime scene? Why were family photographs quietly turned face down? Why was Cheryl's vehicle loaded but never driven away? Why did the offender leave behind cash while taking jewelry? Why were 2 victims killed by blunt force trauma while Jennifer was strangled? Every unanswered question remained waiting for an answer that never arrived. In many ways, the Feeney murders stand as a reminder that the criminal justice system and the search for historical truth are not always the same process. A courtroom determines whether evidence satisfies a specific legal standard. An investigation seeks to discover what actually happened. Sometimes those 2 goals arrive at the same destination. Sometimes they do not. In this case, the legal proceedings concluded without identifying a person legally responsible for the murders, while the investigation itself continued without discovering who committed them. More than 30 years after Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer lost their lives, their case remains open in the broader sense that matters most. 3 victims still await a complete explanation of the events that ended their lives. Until that explanation is found, or unless it is forever lost with the unknown offender, the Feeney. Family murders will continue to occupy a place among the most enduring unsolved homicide mysteries. In the state of Missouri, the Feeney family murders remain one of those cases where every available answer seems to create another question. More than 3 decades after Cheryl Feeney, 6-year-old Tyler Feeney, and 18-month-old Jennifer Feeney were killed inside their Springfield home, the central mystery remains unchanged. Investigators know the identities of the victims. They know the approximate time frame of the crime. They know how each victim died. They know the unusual details left behind at the scene. They know who was investigated, who was charged, and who was ultimately acquitted. But they still do not know who entered the Feeney residence that night, what motivated the killings, or why the crime scene contained so many contradictions. The unanswered questions have become the defining feature of the case, preserving its place among Missouri's most puzzling cold cases. One of the most difficult aspects of the investigation has always been the apparent conflict between the violence of the murders and the strange behavior that followed them. The killings themselves were brutal. Cheryl and Tyler were attacked with a heavy object, suffering repeated blows to the head and face. Jennifer, still only 18 months old, was strangled with a cord or similar ligature. The level of violence suggested an offender who was either deeply motivated by anger, determined to eliminate witnesses, or acting under circumstances that investigators have never fully understood. Yet alongside this extreme violence were actions that appeared almost deliberate and unusual. Someone turned family photographs face down. Someone wrote the words "bitch" and "die" on the wall. Someone created the appearance of a burglary. Someone loaded Cheryl's vehicle with items from inside the home, but left the vehicle behind. These actions created an impression that the offender was not simply attempting to escape after committing a crime. Instead, investigators believe someone may have spent additional time manipulating the scene. The question was why. Staging a crime scene introduces significant risks. The longer an offender remains inside a location after a murder, the greater the possibility of leaving behind evidence or being discovered. If the unusual details inside the Feeney home were intentionally created, the person responsible made a series of choices after the killings. Those choices may have been intended to influence how investigators understood the crime. However, because the offender's identity remains unknown, the purpose behind those actions can only be examined through interpretation rather than certainty. The painted words on the wall remain one of the most memorable elements of the case. The presence of the words "bitch" and "die" immediately suggested anger directed toward Cheryl. Such a message could theoretically indicate a personal motive, suggesting that the victim was specifically targeted. Yet investigators questioned whether the writing was genuine or whether it was designed to create that impression. If the offender truly intended to express rage, the message might reflect personal hatred. If the scene was staged, the words might have been placed there to make authorities believe the crime was motivated by revenge or a personal conflict. Without knowing who wrote the words or why, the message remains one of the most haunting, unresolved details. The method of killing Jennifer also continues to trouble investigators and observers of the case. Cheryl and Tyler were killed through blunt force trauma, apparently using the same type of weapon. Jennifer's death occurred differently. The use of ligature strangulation introduced the possibility that the circumstances surrounding her death were different from those involving her mother and brother. Investigators considered whether this difference indicated multiple offenders or simply a change in the offender's actions during the attack. However, no evidence has ever conclusively established either explanation. The question remains one of the many aspects of the case that cannot be answered from the available evidence alone. Another persistent mystery involves the apparent burglary. When investigators first entered the home, the disturbed rooms and missing property suggested theft. Jewelry was gone. Drawers were open. Belongings were scattered. Yet the fact that cash remained untouched created immediate doubts. A traditional burglary motive did not fully explain the scene. If someone entered the house only to steal, why leave money behind? Why create additional signs that appeared unrelated to theft? Why spend time altering the appearance of the residence? These questions led investigators to believe that the burglary may have been a disguise rather than the actual purpose of the crime. But even if the scene was staged, the identity and motive of the person who staged it remain unknown. The evidence involving the back door presents another example of this uncertainty. Initially, the door appeared to show signs of forced entry, suggesting that an unknown intruder had entered the residence. However, closer examination raised questions about whether the damage reflected genuine force or whether parts of the locking mechanism had been removed intentionally. If the door had been manipulated after the murders, it could have been part of an attempt to create the appearance of an outside attack. But if the damage represented a real entry point, it could suggest that someone unfamiliar with the home gained access. Once again, the same evidence supported different interpretations. The vehicle in the garage added another layer of confusion. Cheryl's car contained household belongings that appeared to have been removed from inside the house. This suggested that someone may have intended to transport stolen property. Yet the car was never taken. Even more unusual, a battery charger had been connected despite the battery functioning properly. There is no confirmed explanation for this action. It may have been part of an attempt to create confusion, or it may have had another purpose that investigators never discovered. The presence of unexplained actions throughout the crime scene is what has made the Feeney case so difficult. Many crimes contain unanswered questions. The challenge in this case is that almost every major piece of evidence raises several possible explanations. The unidentified hairs found on Cheryl's blood-stained nightgown represent another unresolved issue. They suggest that another person may have had contact with Cheryl, but investigators were unable to identify whose hairs they were. The shoe print found at the scene appeared smaller than John Feeney's shoe size, creating another possible indication that someone else may have been inside the home. However, without a known source, the evidence could not identify a suspect. These details have remained important because they represent possible signs of another person connected to the crime, but they have never developed into a confirmed investigative path. The role of John Feeney remains one of the most discussed aspects of the case because he occupied a unique position in the investigation. He was the husband and father of the victims, which naturally placed him under intense scrutiny. At the same time, he was also a person who had an apparent explanation for his location during the weekend. He was at a teachers' conference, had been seen by colleagues, and was eventually acquitted in court. The prosecution argued that he could have traveled to Springfield, committed the murders, and returned before detection. The defense argued that this theory depended on possibility rather than proof. Ultimately, the jury agreed that the evidence presented was insufficient for conviction. The acquittal did not determine who committed the murders, but it did establish that the prosecution had not proven John's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This distinction remains essential when examining the case. Suspicion and evidence are not the same thing. A person may become the focus of an investigation because of circumstances surrounding a crime, but criminal conviction requires proof that meets a specific legal standard. The Feeney trial demonstrated the difficulty of prosecuting a case built primarily on circumstantial evidence. Today, the case continues to raise the same fundamental questions that investigators faced in 1995. Was the offender someone known to the family? Was the crime personal, financial, or something else entirely? Were the unusual details genuine clues or deliberate distractions? Was there one offender or more than one? The available evidence has never provided definitive answers. For the Springfield community and those who continue studying unresolved crimes, the Feeney murders remain a reminder of the devastating impact of an unsolved homicide. Behind every piece of evidence and every legal argument are three individuals whose lives were taken. Cheryl, a mother whose future ended far too soon. Tyler, a 6-year-old child who never had the chance to grow up, and Jennifer, a toddler whose life had barely begun. Their identities are more than names in an investigation file. They were family members, friends, and members of a community that lost them in a moment of unimaginable violence. The passage of time has not erased the importance of finding answers. While the case may have faded from public attention compared with newer investigations, the questions surrounding it remain. Every unsolved homicide represents not only an unanswered legal mystery, but also a lasting absence, experienced by those who knew and loved the victims. The Feeney family murders endure because they contain all the elements that make cold cases so difficult and so compelling. An ordinary family, an extraordinary tragedy, conflicting evidence, unanswered questions, and a search for truth that has continued long after the courtroom doors closed. Until the person responsible is identified, the story of Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer Feeney remains unfinished. Their case continues to wait for the one discovery that could finally transform years of uncertainty into answers. As the years passed after the trial of John Feeney, the case slowly transformed from a highly publicized criminal proceeding into one of Missouri's most persistent unsolved mysteries. The attention surrounding the courtroom arguments eventually faded, but the questions that had surrounded the murders from the beginning remained unchanged. The Feeney family case did not disappear because it had been solved. It disappeared into the category of investigations where the passage of time creates distance but does not provide closure. For investigators, the files remained a record of unanswered questions. For those connected to Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer, the absence of resolution meant that the tragedy never truly reached an ending. The events of February 1995 continued to exist not as a completed story, but as a case waiting for information that could finally explain what happened inside the Feeney home. Cold cases often become defined by what is missing. In the Feeney investigation, what was missing was not evidence that a crime occurred. There was no question that a devastating crime had taken place. 3 members of a family were found dead inside their residence. Their deaths had been violent, and investigators had documented the injuries and circumstances surrounding them. What remained missing was the connection between the evidence and the person responsible. The crime scene contained many details, but none provided the final link needed to identify the offender. This distinction is what kept the investigation unresolved for decades. The evidence existed, but the answer did not. One of the lasting challenges of the case was the difficulty of determining whether the unusual elements found inside the home represented genuine clues or deliberate distractions. Investigators have long considered the possibility that the crime scene was staged. The disturbed rooms, missing jewelry, untouched cash, painted messages, overturned photographs, questionable entry point, and loaded vehicle all suggested that someone may have attempted to influence how authorities interpreted the murders. Yet if staging occurred, it created another mystery rather than solving one. A staged scene is designed to communicate something, but the message left behind in the Feeney home has never been fully understood. Was the offender attempting to make the murders appear like a random burglary? Was someone trying to suggest a personal motive? Was the chaos itself meant to hide a different truth? Without identifying the person who created the scene, investigators have been unable to determine the purpose behind it. The same uncertainty applies to the question of motive. A motive is often one of the most important elements in a homicide investigation because it helps explain why a victim was targeted. In the Feeney case, several possible motives were considered, but none were proven. The prosecution believed financial issues and marital problems provided a possible explanation. They focused on the increased life insurance coverage for Cheryl and the evidence of John's relationships outside the marriage. They argued that these circumstances suggested possible reasons why John might have wanted his wife and children killed. However, the defense challenged that interpretation, emphasizing that personal problems and financial arrangements do not automatically establish criminal intent. The jury ultimately agreed that the prosecution had not proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The result left investigators without a confirmed motive and without a confirmed offender. The question of who could have entered the Feeney residence remains one of the most important. Unresolved issues. The crime scene suggested that another individual may have been present. The unidentified hairs found on Cheryl's bloodstained nightgown and the smaller shoe print found inside the home became significant because they represented possible traces of someone other than John. Yet evidence without identification creates only possibilities. Investigators could not determine whose hair was found. They could not match the shoe print to a known individual. Without those connections, the clues remained incomplete. They suggested that answers might exist somewhere within the evidence, but they did not reveal what those answers were. The unknown offender, if there was one, left behind a scene filled with contradictions. The person responsible appeared to have committed an extremely violent attack, yet also appeared to spend time altering the environment afterward. The offender removed certain property but left other valuable items behind. The offender created signs of disorder but also carried out specific actions, such as turning photographs face down. The offender killed 3 victims using different methods. Each decision left investigators searching for meaning. Criminal investigations often depend on understanding behavior. Detectives examine not only what happened, but why a person might have acted in a particular way. In the Feeney case, the behavior behind the crime has never been clearly interpreted. More than 30 years later, investigators still cannot say with certainty what the offender intended to communicate. Another factor that has kept the case alive is the unresolved question of whether more than one person may have been involved. The difference between the methods used to kill the victims has been one reason this possibility was considered. Cheryl and Tyler appear to have been killed with the same blunt instrument, while Jennifer was strangled. A single offender may have changed methods during the attack. But investigators also considered whether multiple individuals could have participated. Without additional evidence, neither possibility could be confirmed. The uncertainty surrounding the number of offenders has remained another barrier to reaching a complete explanation. The acquittal of John Feeney also continues to influence how the case is viewed. In the public mind, high-profile criminal trials often create a desire for simple conclusions. Someone is either responsible or not responsible. The Feeney case demonstrates that reality can be more complicated. The jury's verdict meant that the prosecution had not proven John's guilt according to the required legal standard. It did not mean investigators had discovered the identity of another killer. It did not explain the unanswered forensic evidence. It did not reveal the motive behind the murders. The legal outcome resolved the question before the court, but it did not resolve the larger mystery surrounding the deaths of Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer. Over time, the Feeney murders have remained significant because they represent the difficulties investigators face when evidence exists in fragments rather than complete pieces. A successful homicide investigation often depends on connecting multiple elements into a clear story. In this case, investigators had many individual facts but lacked the final connection. They knew where the victims were found. They knew how they died. They knew what objects and traces remained at the scene. They knew the timeline surrounding John's conference attendance. They knew the arguments presented by both prosecution and defense. But the complete sequence of events inside the home remains unknown. For the families affected by the murders, the absence of answers represents a different kind of loss. A conviction can never restore the lives taken, but it can provide a sense that the justice system has recognized the wrong committed. An unsolved case leaves families carrying questions that cannot be answered. They may wonder why the crime happened, who was responsible, and whether the truth will ever be discovered. The Feeney family tragedy continues to exist in that space between knowing and not knowing. The facts of the case remain available, but the explanation remains out of reach. The story of the Feeney murders also serves as a reminder of the difference between public attention and investigative progress. A case may receive extensive media coverage, generate public discussion, and become widely known, yet still remain unsolved. Attention can bring awareness, but awareness alone does not guarantee answers. The investigation ultimately depends on evidence that can withstand examination and lead authorities toward the person responsible. In the Feeney case, that evidence has not yet emerged. Despite the passage of time, the investigation remains a part of Missouri's history. The murders continue to be remembered not because of sensational details, but because of the human loss behind them. Cheryl Feeney was a mother whose life ended suddenly. Tyler was a young child whose future was taken away. Jennifer was a toddler who never had the chance to experience the life ahead of her. The unanswered questions surrounding their deaths should never overshadow who they were. They were not simply victims in a criminal investigation. They were people with families, relationships, and lives that mattered. More than 30 years later, the Feeney family murders remain an open wound in Springfield. The evidence has been examined. The courtroom arguments have concluded. The suspect once accused has been acquitted. Yet the central question remains the same. Who killed Cheryl Feeney, Tyler Feeney, and Jennifer Feeney? Until that question is answered, the case remains unfinished. It stands as a reminder that some investigations do not end with a final chapter. They remain waiting, preserved in evidence files and memories, hoping that one day a new discovery will finally reveal the truth hidden inside the quiet house where 3 lives were lost. The Feeney family murders remain a case defined by absence. There is the absence of 3 lives that should have continued. Cheryl Feeney, a 36-year-old mother, Tyler Feeney, a 6-year-old boy with his entire future ahead of him, and Jennifer Feeney, an 18-month-old child whose life had barely begun. There is the absence of a clear explanation for why they were killed. There is the absence of a confirmed offender. And there is the absence of the final piece of evidence that could connect the many unanswered questions into a complete and undeniable truth. More than 3 decades after the events of February 26th and 27th, 1995, the case remains one of Missouri's most haunting unsolved homicide investigations. The story began in a quiet Springfield neighborhood, in a home that appeared ordinary from the outside. The Feeney family lived a life that, to their neighbors, seemed familiar and stable. John Feeney worked as a chemistry teacher at Glendale High School. Cheryl cared for their family. Tyler and Jennifer were young children growing up in what should have been a safe environment. Nothing about the house suggested that it would become the location of a crime that would continue to raise questions for decades. But inside that home, during one night, everything changed. The investigation that followed would examine every possible detail: relationships, finances, travel timelines, physical evidence, and the unusual condition of the crime scene. Yet despite the efforts of investigators and the attention of prosecutors, the case never reached the conclusion many expected. Instead, it became a story about uncertainty, about the limitations of evidence, and about the difficulty of finding answers when the most important witness, the person responsible, never comes forward. When investigators first entered the Feeney residence on the morning of February 27, 1995, they encountered a scene that appeared chaotic but also strangely controlled. The house showed signs of disturbance. Drawers had been opened. Belongings had been moved. Some jewelry was missing. The appearance suggested a possible burglary. However, almost immediately, investigators noticed details that did not fit a simple robbery. Cash remained in the home. Certain actions appeared unnecessary for a thief attempting to escape quickly. Family photographs had been turned face down. A vehicle in the garage had been loaded with items from inside the house, but had not been taken. A battery charger had been connected even though the vehicle's battery was functioning. These details created the possibility that the scene had been altered after the murders. But they never revealed who had done so or why. The deaths themselves created additional questions. Cheryl and Tyler had suffered fatal blunt force injuries caused by repeated strikes from a heavy object. The similarity between their injuries suggested the same weapon may have been used against both. Jennifer's death was different. The 18-month-old child was strangled with a cord or similar ligature. This difference became one of the most discussed aspects of the investigation. It raised questions about the offender's actions, possible changes in circumstances, and whether more than one person may have been involved. However, the available evidence never provided a definitive answer. The physical evidence collected from the home offered possibilities, but not conclusions. Investigators recovered unidentified hairs from Cheryl's bloodstained nightgown. They documented a shoe print that appeared smaller than John Feeney's shoe size. They searched for the murder weapon, but never found it. They examined the signs of possible entry and questioned whether the back door had truly been forced open or whether the appearance of entry had been created. Each discovery had potential significance, but none produced the breakthrough investigators needed. This lack of certainty shaped the entire case. The investigation eventually focused heavily on John Feeney. As the husband and father of the victims, he naturally became a central figure in the investigation. Prosecutors argued that several circumstances pointed toward him. They highlighted the increased life insurance policy on Cheryl, the evidence of marital problems, John's relationships with other women, and the possibility that he could have traveled from the teachers' conference near the Lake of the Ozarks back to Springfield during the night. They argued that the unusual crime scene was staged to make investigators believe an unknown intruder was responsible. According to their theory, the burglary appearance, painted messages, and other strange details were all part of an attempt to create confusion. The defense presented a different interpretation. They argued that suspicion was not evidence of guilt. They emphasized that no witness saw John leave the conference. No evidence placed him inside the home during the murders. No murder weapon connected him to the crime. And no forensic evidence proved that he committed the killings. They pointed to the unidentified hairs and the smaller shoe print as indications that another person may have been involved. They argued that the prosecution's timeline depended on what John could have done, not what investigators could prove he actually did. When the case reached trial in September 1996, the central issue was whether the circumstantial evidence was strong enough to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After hearing the arguments from both sides, the jury reached its decision on October 5, 1996. John Feeney was found not guilty of all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The verdict did not declare that the murders had been solved. It did not identify another suspect. It did not explain the crime scene. It only determined that the evidence presented in court was insufficient to convict John under the standards required by law. After the trial ended, the questions surrounding the case continued. Cheryl's relatives pursued a civil lawsuit intended to prevent John from financially benefiting from the deaths of Cheryl and the children. But that action was later withdrawn. No civil court determined responsibility. No additional suspect was charged. No conviction followed. The case remained unresolved. In the years that followed, the Feeney murders became an example of the challenges faced by cold case investigators. Time can sometimes reveal new information, but time can also create additional obstacles. Witness memories fade. Circumstances change. People move away. Evidence may become more difficult to interpret. Yet the importance of preserving old cases remains because new technology, new investigative methods, or previously unknown information can sometimes transform an investigation. The Feeney case continues to exist because the possibility of answers remains. The evidence collected in 1995 still represents the foundation of any future investigation. The unanswered questions remain clear. Who wrote the words on the wall? Was the crime scene genuinely staged? And if so, by whom? Why were Cheryl and Tyler killed with a blunt instrument while Jennifer was strangled? Why were photographs turned face down? Why were belongings placed inside Cheryl's vehicle but left behind? Who left the unidentified hairs? Who made the smaller shoe print? These questions are not simply details of a mystery. Each one represents a missing part of the story of 3 people whose lives were taken. Behind the investigation files and courtroom arguments are the human consequences of the crime. Cheryl was not only a victim in a homicide report. She was a mother, a wife, and a person with relationships and memories that existed beyond the night she died. Tyler was not only evidence in a criminal investigation. He was a 6-year-old child who should have experienced years of growth, friendships, and opportunities. Jennifer was not only the youngest victim. She was a child whose life had barely begun. Remembering those facts is essential because unresolved cases can sometimes become focused on suspects, theories, and evidence while the victims themselves become lost in the discussion. The Feeney murders endure because the loss behind the investigation remains impossible to ignore. The legal system reached a conclusion in 1996, but the search for truth did not. A verdict can determine whether evidence meets a legal standard, but it cannot always reveal what truly happened. In the Feeney case, those two realities exist side by side. John Feeney was acquitted, yet 3 members of his family were still murdered. Investigators considered evidence, but no one was convicted. The crime scene was examined, but its meaning remains uncertain. More than 30 years later, the case continues to represent the difficult space between justice and unanswered questions. The story of the Feeney family murders is not only about what happened inside a Springfield home on one night in February 1995. It is also about the search for truth that continued afterward. It is about investigators who followed evidence but encountered uncertainty. It is about a courtroom that examined allegations but found reasonable doubt. It is about a family that lost 3 loved ones and continues to carry unanswered questions. And ultimately, it is about 3 victims whose lives deserve to be remembered. Until the person responsible is identified, the Feeney family murders will remain an unfinished story. The evidence remains. The questions remain. The search for answers remains. And somewhere within those unanswered details may still be the truth of what happened to Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer Feeney.